Hello, everyone, and welcome to Food Ag Ideas Week 2021 Hybrid Edition. My name is Allison Hahn, and I'm the Executive Director of Grow North. At Grow North, we work to create an interconnected, invested, and accessible ecosystem for Minnesota's entrepreneurs and innovators across food and agriculture. Grow North is housed at the Holmes Center of Entrepreneurship at the Carlson School of Business at the University of Minnesota. We are a nonprofit and could not exist without the support of the community and the support of our sponsors. These include our premier partner at General Mills and numerous additional sponsors, including Hormel, Land O'Lakes, Lazard Middle Market, Compeer Financial, Continental Grain Ventures, the Minnesota Department of Ag, Target, Clifton Larson Allen, Bremer Bank, the Canadian Consulate, Gather Ventures, C&B Operations, Plug and Play Fargo, and partners such as the Finovation Lab, the Hartman Group, the Grand Farm, and many, many more. And with the support of our sponsors and the community, we are able to bring world-class events like Food Ag Ideas Week to further connect and develop our ecosystem. We are excited to bring you a full lineup of content, experiences, and networking over the course of this week, spanning food systems, agriculture, and the CPG space. Today, I'm excited to kick off our content with a panel that is very near and dear to my heart, Scaling for Success for Minnesota's Entrepreneurs. A new player in our entrepreneurship support ecosystem is the MBOLD Growth Program, launched by the MBOLD Coalition earlier this year. MBOLD consists of leaders from some of the world's foremost food and agricultural companies, research institutions, and nonprofit organizations, and are driving MBOLD's work to test and execute solutions to the biggest challenges facing our food system. One of the 5 pillars of work for MBOLD is entrepreneurship and innovation, and one key to entrepreneurial success is the ability to access the right help at the right time. The MBOLD Growth Program does just that by opening the door to some of Minnesota's foremost food and ag companies through tailored mentorship around issues of the entrepreneur's choosing. And today, we'll be hearing from 2 companies participating in this program, Centera and Peace Coffee, on their experience and listen in on what they think are the most important ways corporations can support growth-based companies. And then we will pivot and hear from key MBOLD member McKinsey and an ecosystem partner of ours, Continental Grain Ventures, about how those needs get woven into the investment landscape and what Minnesota will need to do to become the premier hub of food and ag innovation in the US and beyond. But first, I will be introducing our moderator for this panel, Nick Williams. Nick is the business reporter for the Star Tribune here in Minneapolis, and at the Strip, he focuses on tech startups and small businesses and has been focusing on emerging and growth-based companies in the food and ag space. Nick, we are thrilled to have you join us today to moderate this panel. Welcome.
Thanks, Allison. Thanks for bringing me on. Good morning, people tuning in. Thanks for joining us for this great discussion this morning.
Wonderful.
I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists for this morning discussion, starting with Lee Wallace, CEO of Peace Coffee, Jody Longshore, Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Centera, David Fiocco, partner at McKinsey, and Brian Loeb, co-head of Conti Ventures at Continental Grain Company. Good morning. The first portion of our discussion this morning is going to involve talking with Jody and Lee about the participation in the MBOLD Growth Program. But before that, Lee, I just asked to give us a quick 30-second intro into Peace Coffee.
Certainly, happy to do that. Peace Coffee is a company we've been around since 1996. We import, roast, and sell delicious fair trade and organic coffee. We are a certified B Corporation, and we are proudly in it for good.
Thank you. And Jody, give us 30 seconds on Centera.
Thanks, Nick. Centera has been around for about 5 years. We are an ag tech company. We have a platform that works to collect, aggregate, and analyze agricultural data from many sources. We work with food companies to help them monitor their performance of their supply chains with metrics that help them understand things like quality, quantity, production, and sustainability impact. We work with agribusinesses to develop, test, validate, commercialize new products. And we help agronomists and ag retailers serve their farmer customers more effectively. We like to say that we use the same data for many different purposes to benefit the food and ag industry.
All right, thank you, Jody. So first question, Lee, I'm going to start with you. Can you explain your company's experience in the MBOLD Growth Program?
Yeah, absolutely. So we applied for the Bold Growth Program because we are really excited about the idea of a future where we have a really robust food ecosystem in Minnesota. So our project, so when you apply for the program, you really work to determine a good project that you can work on with the premier CPG companies in Minnesota. So our project was started with Target Corporation, and we sell packages of coffee at Target. And what we wanted to understand is who is our consumer at Target, with the hopes of leveraging that data to find that same consumer at other retailers, and also to improve our connection with that consumer at Target. And I would say overall, the experience has been excellent. I mean, to have Target's consumer insights team and the buyer on the coffee desk just team up with us to really get us data and insights has been immeasurable in terms of the learnings. So it's kind of humbling to have them, come to us and say, yeah, we really do want to help, and we really want to see a better food ecosystem here.
Jody, same question for you. How did the Bold Growth Program help Centerra?
Yeah, so when we think about Centerra's solution, it is broadly applicable across many different parts of the food and agriculture ecosystem. And so what we were really working to understand is, where do we focus? Who are those target prospects and customers who would find the most immediate value and were most ready to adopt our solutions? And so MBOLD really helped us get access to an expert network and influencer resources to help us test, validate, and refine our value proposition for some of the key customer segments that we're looking for. They helped us make connections with a lot of stakeholders at some of Minnesota's food and ag companies, and we're even actually exploring some commercial opportunities now with some of those connections that MBOLD helped us to make. And then based on the feedback that we received, we've actually adapted our focus and our go-to-market strategy, and we're really now looking at some of really focusing our efforts on those verticals where we know we've got the most immediate interest, as demonstrated by the experts MBOLD connected us with.
Thank you both. You both mentioned these connections and new relationships through the program. But I'm still curious about some of the challenges you still have to face to grow your business. So either through the program or just in general, what are some of the challenges your company still faces in trying to scale and grow? Start with you, Lee.
Okay, thank you. I think one thing that Peace Coffee faces and sees as a challenge and also an opportunity is introducing ourselves to consumers in new geographies. So, we're a business that has gone very deep in the Upper Midwest. We have a lot of distribution in the Upper Midwest. But as we get into retailers in Arizona or California or Florida, how do we introduce ourselves effectively? How do we use our resources to effectively introduce ourselves or market ourselves really to consumers in those new geographies and get them to pick up that bag of coffee and say, you know what, I'm going to try this. So that's what really where our learning edge is right now, is just learning how, as your base gets more diffuse, how do you communicate and find your consumers effectively?
Jody, same question for you and Centerra. What are some of the challenges your company is seeing as you want to scale and grow and expand?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that we have is that when you're working in production agriculture, you get one at-bat per season, per year. And so for us, one of the challenges has been the pace of customer adoption. When we look at our customer base, we are working with users and customers at most of the big companies that we would want to work with, both in agricultural production and in product development and in food and CPG. But the challenge is that our cycle really takes 3 years to get adopted by a company. So we go through a year of trial, and we go through a year where they may use us across a business unit, and then we go through a year where they will start to scale up with us. And of course, for a startup, that sort of rate of adoption is a challenge. And so one of the things that we're really working to do is try and get our customers that are having success with us to work with their partners in their supply chain and across their production to introduce us to those partners and advocate for us in a way that they can have confidence in our solution faster and adopt it quicker, so that we can speed up the pace of go to market.
It's interesting how both of you had similar challenges in terms of adoption. You know, Lee with adoption of new customers, Jody with adoption of your clients. So even though you're in separate, kind of verticals there, what are companies like yours who are still trying to scale and grow? What are some of the needs you need for Minnesota's food and ag ecosystem to overcome those challenges? What are some of the programming or resources you think your company needs? I'm gonna flip it this time, and Jody, I want to start with you on that question.
Sure. Yeah. When you look at the companies that are headquartered in Minnesota, we have leaders up and down the food and agriculture supply chain. And so, one of the things that we're working on is trying to partner with some of those organizations to create demonstrations and case studies and use cases that show the value that can be created when you combine, aggregate, and analyze data from the field all the way to the fork. And we think that with that demonstrated value proposition all the way across the supply chain, we should be able to move into other supply chains, other regions, and accelerate our growth even faster. So, Minnesota, I think, is unique in that all parts of that supply chain are present here in one geographic location.
Lee, same question for you. What needs to be injected into the state's food and ag ecosystem to help a company like Peace Coffee grow and meet its potential?
Yeah, it's there's that old adage, entrepreneurship is a lonely journey, and I think what I see and what I think will be really would really give a booster shot, if you will, to the food and ag ecosystem in the state of Minnesota is exactly the kind of thing that Bold Growth is trying to accomplish, which is building a bigger ecosystem. I'm part of a CEO group that's based out of California that's all purpose-based, mission-driven CPG companies. And using that as an example, if we have questions, we can just we have an email list where we can just ask each other questions, and it's anything from hey, anybody have a good idea for a broker for Publix, or is anybody facing this challenge? Has anybody implemented this ERP? All kinds of questions like that. And a lot of those businesses are based in California, and I think they have a much more value add experience than I do, because they get together in person. They'll get together in person, they'll talk shop, they chat. And there are businesses here definitely that we reach out to directly and say, hey, what about this, or have you tried this, or have you learned about this? But I think building a more robust ecosystem will just benefit all of these businesses, because there's more people on the same journey. When you have more people on the same journey, you just it may take longer, but you get there together as a group. So I think that's what I'm really looking forward to.
And just a reminder for our viewers, if you do have a question for one of our panelists, please drop it in the chat, and we'll try to get to it later in discussion. Lee and Jody, I'm sure a lot of viewers will be interested to know, you talked about the relationships and connections you've gotten through the program. I guess if anybody has any relationship like that, some of the insights you've gotten, how do you leverage that to grow? How do you build upon that knowledge? Or how do you build upon that new relationship with a big player to move the company forward? I'm sure people who are interested in growing their company in the same position as yours want to know, what do I do next? I guess, Lee, I'll start with you. I mean, you talked about the insights you got from a company like the biggest Target. How do you use that relationship to help you?
Yeah, and there are additional components of our project. So we will next be working with some local CPG companies to say, okay, we have these consumer insights. how do we use them to develop a targeted marketing campaign that we can test, or what do they believe would be an effective marketing campaign? I do have an example though of just even very immediately how we use those insights. We've been discussing, we're have been partnering with a company called Misfits Market, which is a seller of sort of imperfect produce, and they're beginning to get more into pantry items. And we've been selling coffee through them for a couple of years now, but they're getting to be one of our larger customers. And we were talking with a new buyer last week, and she showed us their deck, and I was able to say to her, wow, your consumer looks a lot like this consumer that's also shopping at this other, big retailer that we work with. And so, we think we'd be very successful with you, and they're looking for an everyday coffee brand. So I was able to say, we have data that shows, without sharing the data back and forth, but just saying, we have data that shows that we could do very, very well with you, and that we were able to use that to get into a conversation about being one of their everyday coffee brands.
Thank you, Lee. And Jody, I'm going to put that question to you. I'll repeat it, just following up on one of the first questions I asked you, and the new relationships and connections you built through the program. How do you leverage that relationship to scale Centerra?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear Lee talk about some of the startups out of California. When we look at our competition, many of our competitors are actually headquartered in California. We're a tech company, but many of our competitors are also not solely focused on the food and agriculture industry. And so we see being headquartered in Minnesota actually being an advantage for us in this space, because we are right in the center of the food and agriculture space, geographically speaking. And one of the ways that manifests itself is that when we look at some of the customers that we're currently working with who have vertically integrated supply chains in particular, so it could be a food company that works with a food processor who works with farmers to contract for grain, and those farmers' crops are often insured by some private insurance instrument. Centerra can then bring tools to bear that will help those the farmers' advisors, help them make decisions that make them more productive, more efficient, more sustainable, record and aggregate that data to help the food companies at the end of the supply chain be able to quantify the sustainability impacts of the products that they bring to market, which then makes them more marketable to the consumers that they sell to. We help the food processors in the middle of the supply chain. Again, keep tabs on the expected quality and quantity that's going to come out of the fields that they contract with farmers to produce, which then helps them for things like grain origination. They can go out to the market sooner and buy anything else that they need to out of the commodity markets, and they have an early signal to that. And so the beautiful thing in Minnesota is that all parts of that supply chain are present here in the local community. And so the connections that we've been able to put in place with customers who are vertically integrated in that way and who are all here locally has been really valuable to us, and the connections that MBOLD has helped us make for some companies who have supply chains that are set up like that has been really useful, and I think is going to help us accelerate our growth.
I'm curious, Joe, what you said about it says a couple of times in discussion how being located in Minnesota is an advantage. So I'm curious, if not for programs like MBOLD North or being centrally located in the Midwest hub like the Twin Cities, how long would it take a company like yours to make those type of connections without it? I'm just curious at your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's interesting. I've actually had calls with customers, and one of the first questions they've asked is, where is your company located? And then when I tell them it's in Minnesota, they say, okay, good. You're not one of those valley companies that thinks they're going to come out and tell the agriculture industry what to do, and they've never set foot on a farm before. They've never gotten their boots muddy. So I think that being in Minnesota actually gives us more credibility when we first reach out to companies in the agricultural space and start to talk to them. And we have employees that grew up on a farm or that have worked in the agriculture industry that also have a tech background. I mean, Minnesota is great too, because we have great educational institutions here at the University of Minnesota. And so we have, I think, unique access to talent that has a combination of both technology skills and food and agriculture backgrounds. And so yeah, I think we have more credibility when we are first introduced to a company based on the types of talent that we're able to attract to the company, and our knowledge of the space as a result of being right in the center of things.
Thank you both. We'll return to Lee and Jody later. Now, I want to bring in Brian and David to continue in our second part of the discussion. Brian and David, are you there?
Yep.
All
Here,
right.
ready to go.
Brian, going to start with you. Give us a quick 30 seconds on your role at Conti Ventures and what that organization is about.
Yeah, happy to. So Conti Ventures is the venture arm, the venture focus of Continental Grain. We've been investing in food tech and ag tech since 2016. We do have a partnership with the Boulder Food Group, who only focuses on better for you brands. And that goes back to 2014. So we've had a pretty active presence in VC across the food and ag value chain since 2014 and since 2016. Continental Grain is a private business that has a over 200-year history in food and ag. It started out in grain trading and moved into animal protein. We actually sold the grain trading business to Cargill a little bit more than 20 years ago. And with that transition from being a operating holdco to more of a hybrid operator and investor. So today we have investments that span the entire value chain, whether it's downstream into places like Panera, Burger King, Kraft Heinz, and Keurig, or still in the animal protein space. Hopefully I have another 200 years ahead of us.
Thank you, Brian. David, if you will, please give us a little intro on yourself and McKinsey. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a partner here with McKinsey's Minneapolis office. McKinsey's a global management consulting company that works across industries, but there's a large team of us around the world that's deeply committed to advancing agriculture and food across the value chain, from as far upstream as you can go in land investments and basic R&D, all the way to food retail. I personally lead our digital and analytics team in agriculture globally, and have had the opportunity to be one of the founding partners of MBOLD with a real goal around growing the technology and entrepreneurship in this region. I firmly believe we've got the right to be global leaders here, and our goal is to help make that happen.
I'm gonna stick with you, David. The comment just made about growing the ecosystem. McKinsey just recently analyzed Minnesota's food and ag system. So what were some of the key takeaways you saw in that study as it applies to the state's food and ag industry?
It's interesting. As a region, we have a lot going for us. The conversation, we have a welcoming startup community. We have relatively strong talent. We have one of the highest concentrations of food scientists and operations talent in the world, given some of the companies that Jody was just mentioning. And funding has grown. Venture capital investments in food and ag in the region are up 60% since 2015. And just the fact that we have some of the leaders in food, in agriculture, one of the leading land grant universities with ag research. We have funders like Conti, and we have startups across the ecosystem. Just gives us a unique starting point. That said, we tried to take a really objective, fact-based look at how we were doing relative to other regions like Boulder and Austin and Raleigh-Durham that have been attracting food and ag technology faster. We found that while we are ahead or on track in many areas, we still have a lower number of startups in the region. We have a lower survival rate. And we have a strong university presence, we have strong downstream presence, but we haven't yet achieved the level of collaboration that we see in best-in-class regions between academic research, early-stage startups, and late-stage growth companies. So, in some ways, we're thrilled that Lee and Jody are examples of the most sparkling talent and startups in the region, but we need dozens more. And just, we still have a lower density in the region here that stops us from achieving our full potential.
Just a follow-up question on that, Dave. You talk about our collaboration here isn't as high as those regions. I hear this sometimes that working in silos is a thing you'll see often in Minnesota and throughout the Twin Cities. Is that one of the reasons we work too much in the silo here? Do we break down those walls and create more opportunities for academia to work with entrepreneurs, to work with corporations?
You said it extremely well. We have silos in each area. So our research is great, but we talk about the valley of death of early stage startups who have or early stage technology that has proved a concept, but of really getting it to scale. There's a long way to go from being a first or second year company to playing at the scale of Cargill and General Mills. And we've got some really exciting initiatives from those large global leaders and like Lee's example of Target and Peace Coffee, bringing smaller local players into their supply chains. But it's a challenge, and we need to make sure some regions that have more of that middle layer have managed to get outside of the silos. I'd also say, while our talent is really great in the food and agriculture space, we are behind in attracting pure digital talent. And so for a lot of technology-based startups, the availability of rockstar developers and coders and data scientists here, they're in high demand. Many of them get pulled to the industry leaders, and we just don't have nearly the number that you'd see in a Boulder or an Austin.
Interesting. Brian, I'm going to put this question to you. I think you mentioned before that Conti Ventures began in 2016.
Yep.
So tell us why this venture arm of Continental Grain Company is investing in early stage brands. What was the mission behind it? And maybe what are some of the realizations you're seeing in that return on your investments? Thanks.
Yeah. So I think the mission is twofold. One, it's that thematically, we believe there's a meaningful opportunity to continue to improve the food and ag value chain. It's something we have tremendous respect for. It's what it looks like today in terms of delivering food across the globe at the prices it does is pretty incredible to me. But certainly there's opportunities to improve the sustainability of the system, to improve the health of the system, to make parts of the value chain better. So, how can we deliver more profit to farmers and more resilient profit to farmers? So those themes are ones that, the management team and kind of everyone at Continental Grain acknowledges and gets excited about. And then the second layer is we think we can be a value add partner. So where we tend to focus is when businesses are getting pretty close or are ready to commercialize. So, we're not usually the first investor when it's a few co-founders and an idea, because we're not the former scientists, we're not the former entrepreneurs. What we look to do actually is use our network that we've been building and continue to invest in over these 200 years. And similar to some of the comments that Lee and Jody have made, we look to connect our portfolio to existing players in the value chain, whether they're the huge companies like the Targets and Cargills, or whether they're more mid-market businesses that have been, excelling in a niche for a while. So our goal is to help accelerate commercialization, and we hope that by being value add, this will drive good returns and let us therefore do it for a long time.
Yeah, it's a good example of breaking down a wall. you're talking about bringing that knowledge, 200 years worth of knowledge into these early startup companies. David, kicking it back to you, we're talking about collaboration being a problem, the survivability of companies here not having enough, I guess, tech talent to do this. What are some of the other things that Minnesota's food and ag system needs to grow and compete with Boulder, Austin, Raleigh-Durham, maybe other ecosystems that are similar to ours?
So, there's some things that we've started recently that have been, quite helpful. The number of incubators, collaboration programs, and partnerships to really support early stage players is something that we see as a key in many geographies. Techstars coming to Minneapolis and having the food and ag based program here has been a remarkable boon. So continuing to look at supportive programs like that will definitely help. I think we see regions like Fargo have done a great job of fostering that community, and some of this is informal connections, but given, to your point, the potential to break down silos and bring together, technologists and entrepreneurs, even if they're in a corporate setting, creating more of those communities that keep people here, that retain companies here, will be a huge help. And then, as we've seen funding grow, just continuing to make the case for more organizations like Brian to center themselves in Minnesota and think about how they can add value beyond capital. Funding and communities of funding really create success. And so we've seen growth there. It's been encouraging to see the number of the industry leaders in the region talk about their enhanced partnerships, funding, and support to startups. So that will help too. And then we've had a couple of exciting exits in the last couple of years. One thing we say is sometimes we are too humble as Minnesotans, and we don't do a great job of telling that story. So how do we do more to share those successes when they do happen? And to make sure we don't just talk amongst ourselves, but we help those in the Valley and those in Austin and elsewhere hear about our great success stories and think about the unique benefits that they could get here. And so that needs to be a local, regional, national, and even global coordinated media, social and traditional media outreach effort.
Brian, I want to get your thoughts on this through your lens, I guess, through the finance and venture capital lens of what Minnesota's food and ag system needs to grow and be more competitive.
Yeah, happy to do it. So first off, I'm actually the New Yorker amongst our Conti Ventures team. It's my partner, Chris Abbott, who's from Minneapolis and refuses to leave for good reason. And as I joined Conti in 2016, Chris joined in 2018, and he was an excellent addition to our team. And to be honest, Conti wasn't in the habit of hiring people outside of New York. But our CEO, when we brought on Chris, joked that there is no ag tech in Central Park. And what we were looking for was, we'd been in ag for a long time, but the nuance of bringing innovation to that space and getting farmers to adopt it, creating partnerships, there's a lot that's difficult there. And so what we were looking for was that much more empathy for the farmer. And Chris, being from Minneapolis, having the network that he had, was really advantageous in that. So I want to echo what everyone's been hitting on, which is there's a real strength to Minneapolis and to Minnesota because you really are connected to all parts of the value chain. You can have access to farmers and have the credibility of being from a region that understands them. You can have access to processing, to brands, to the actual retail presence that we've been talking about with Target. And one of the biggest things we think about when we invest in a startup, you're looking for them to ultimately be successful, and you're also looking for a good trajectory of how they achieve that success. And talent, as David has been emphasizing, is definitely something that will determine those two factors. Passion plays into that talent also. And so, feeling like this is a a problem that you know because it's in your backyard, I think is an impactful thing. And then lastly, we really focus on the fact that, you know, in the 5 years we've been doing this, I would say no company we've met is, if they succeed, is going to truly rewrite the script of how the food and ag value chain works. Everything has to fit within in some way, and therefore everything has to have partnerships. Everything has to, you know, learn from the success stories that are out there today and appreciate the pain points that there are to solve. And so I think in Minneapolis, there's a unique ability to actually, as Lee and Jody were saying, you know, be in front of your customer, be close to your partners, and have a stronger trajectory because you can learn faster. This has also been hit on, but I think the room, you know, growth might not be the right word, but the room to continue doubling down on improvement is, I think, really just about being extremely open with everyone's networks. You know, if you have an investor visiting, if you have a partner visiting from another part of the country, maybe get into the habit of saying, you know, who else do you want to meet in food and ag thematically? And not every time are you going to be able to set something up for them, but if 1/3 of the time they end up having a longer visit to Minneapolis or more fruitful visit to Minneapolis and to Minnesota because you were able to connect them with someone else, that is going to pay dividends in the long run, because before you know it, you know, an investor is going to be visiting a different company in a slightly different part of the value chain, and you're going to get an email saying, hey, this person's in town, they'd be interested in meeting you, and that might become a really impactful partner for you. So I think people can be extremely open with their networks and it'll pay off. And I think the last thing I would say is, probably comes as no surprise to anyone watching this, that success in food and ag is not going to happen overnight. It's a long journey. And even as we, you know, the current wave of companies that we've alluded to, even as they hit successful milestones, there's still going to be a lot of work to be done 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So we can be patient in this endeavor. You know, there's value in really putting effort into this, because it is going to take a few decades to really get to where we want to go.
Kind of touching on both something you both said. Dave, you said the amount of venture capital dollars in Minnesota's food and ag system has risen significantly. And what is the reason behind that? Are we seeing a greater number of quality companies that investors are interested in? Or is it the flip side? Investors are just now have their eye on the Twin Cities. I mean, Brian just said, had a partner in 2018, and I guess they have that focus. So maybe I'll start with you there, Brian, since you're on the VC side.
Yeah.
What could be some of the reasons why we're seeing an increase in venture capital dollars coming into Minnesota?
I think you're hitting on both sides of it. And it goes back to that patience point. I mean, the entire food and ag ecosystem, candidly, is seeing more investment. So I don't necessarily know the relative rate of increase, but the entire space is seeing more investment, which means over time companies are getting more mature. They're raising larger rounds. We are an investor in Centera, and that's an example where they continue to grow, they continue to impress, and so you know, not usually you'll raise larger rounds when that happens. And then part of that is investors are, you know, becoming more familiar with the narratives of why innovation within food and ag matters, more convinced that innovation can succeed within food and ag, which should not be taken for granted. And all of that creates kind of a flywheel. Again, I think today, Minnesota and Minneapolis, among the best places in the world for it. And we do look at opportunities globally. We have an investment in the UK, we have an investment in Israel. So we don't just think about Minneapolis on a US scale, it's on a global scale, and it really is one of the best places in the world. So.
And David, just your thoughts on why we've seen VC dollars increase.
Yeah, Brian's answer was a good one. You know, the overall growing maturity of food and ag tech is exciting. In last year, there was a 41% increase in venture capital in the food and ag space, a 1-year increase. on top of double digits in the previous few years. So, we're up at $8 billion into the space each year. So it's a big number. And, some of that is, the technology is maturing and getting to scale. And so, those scale up investments are really exciting. And then, I think to Brian's point, we've got a handful of local leaders that are really lighting the way. Some exit deals, like the Conservice deal that was just announced a couple of months ago. That's a good example of startups, getting to join forces with large industry players, and so that excitement is just continuing to power, as Brian said, power the flywheel.
Last question for you two, the innovation piece. Brian, you said like it takes a while for things to develop. What are some of the, I guess, most notable innovation that you're realizing? Is there companies that are focused more on, clean energy in food and ag space, or is it more organic food? Like, what is driving innovation in food and ag right now? And David, I'll start with you on this one.
I think you alluded to it there. The intersection between sustainability and ag tech has been one of the most exciting intersections we've seen in broadly in tech innovation. That can be part of the broader push for decarbonization and reaching greenhouse gas reduction goals. Farming more efficiently can make a huge difference there, and you need technology and data to be able to adopt new practices and capture the data from what you're doing. I think I'd broaden that more, more generally to a resource efficiency point. Our farmers do amazing work every day, putting food on the table for the 9 billion people that we'll soon have in the world, and we're asking growers to do more with less, and to be able to track more of what they're doing and be able to ensure the traceability and the safety and the sustainability of what they're producing. And while farmers have used technology in their fields forever, we haven't always had the ability to collect that data at scale. We haven't always had the ability to make decisions, not just at the county or field level, but even at the individual plant level. And some of the technology today is really letting us make that decision. And Centera and what Jody's team is doing is a great example of starting to make those decisions at the individual plant level and use 40, 50, 60% fewer resources to produce the food we eat, and do it in a way that there's data to tell the story and ensure the veracity of what we're seeing.
Brian, what are some of those innovations that's driving the industry now that you and your team are seeing?
David hit on it really well. Data plays a huge role in this on the food side and on the ag side. There's a biotech component that continues to be really impactful as you think about how to reimagine value chains, how you think about just improving resource efficiency. And then I think the third thing is, this is outside of the portfolio that I build on a daily basis, but the Boulder Food Group, who I mentioned, certainly is focused on it. Part of it is just a better for you CPG movement that is trying to solve different consumer needs and evolving consumer needs. And a lot of times that isn't technology, it's more the choices that a brand makes and the stories they tell, also as Lee was alluding to. And so I think those three things, the data, a lot of biotech tools, and just evolving consumer needs, all three of those are coming together in very interesting ways.
And again, remind our viewers that if you have a question for any of our panelists or just a general question overall, so please drop that question in the chat. I'd like to bring in Lee and Jody back into the main room. We do have a question from the audience. As Lee and Jody join us, the question is, corporations are sometimes notorious for having closed doors towards helping emerging companies. Is it a culture shift internally, or what needs to happen to have those connections happen more organically, so programs like Bold Growth will not be necessary to help facilitate those connections in the future? Going back, I guess, to another silo question, David. So who wants to take this one?
I'd actually take it. So
Thanks.
Brian made a comment that I think was spot on. So he talked about the importance of working within the system in food and agriculture. And I think a lot of times when you hear messaging around startups, and even CNBC has their Disruptor 50 that they publish every year. So you always hear about tech startups being disruptors. And I'm not sure that messaging works in the food and agriculture space. There's so many people that, especially when you start looking at the coasts and things like that, who have a perception of agriculture as being a problem to be solved, whether it be with sustainability or food security or nutrition, or any of these things. And I think the interesting thing about food and agriculture is that there's actually not a conflict of interest in agriculture between what is sustainable and best for the environment, what is best for nutrition and for people, and what is best for the producers that are bringing these things to market. So, the farmer who is the most efficient in production will also be the most sustainable if you look at the data. And so the beautiful thing is that in our industry, there is no conflict of interest. And so there's not really a necessity to disrupt the status quo. We can work with the existing incumbents in the industry, help them achieve their goals more effectively. And in doing so, we will solve problems like sustainability. And so I think that's one of the things that we really focus on, is not trying to disrupt the industry, but work within it, bring solutions to market that help people achieve the goals that they've already got, because those goals are in line with what needs to happen. And so I think that when you take that approach, you will see more of these larger established companies be more open to working with startups and new players.
Would anyone else like to weigh in on that question? Why do we need more collaboration between the larger corporations so that we don't? I mean, we would need a program like MBOLD North, but maybe at a lesser scale. David, I see you getting ready to answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jody's answer is a great one. I think there's a couple of other pieces that I'd say. One is that sometimes we team up with startups that have done a great job with the science and not a great job of thinking like a farmer or thinking like a consumer and being clear about their problem that they're solving. And it's very difficult. Most of the large corporations just don't have the development capacity to translate great science to something that's relevant from scratch, unless it comes to them a little bit further along with some pretty clear proofs of concepts of how that technology will make a difference in the field. So, I think that's certainly something where incubators and mentorships and partnerships can help. But there's responsibilities on both sides for that. I'd also say, particularly in the Twin Cities region, there has been a culture shift. And I think we're seeing more and more, again, I've called out General Mills and Cargill. I'd call out Land O'Lakes. Some of our largest largest players in the region have been very vocal about both bringing in-house entrepreneurs to help work with smaller brands and creating funds and programs that make it easier for a small player who's not quite ready to slot into billion-dollar supply chains or slot into quarterly cadences of reporting and scaling, but to still have a start. So I love those initiatives. I think we're seeing large corporations realize that they're win-wins. When those initiatives succeed, they get stories to tell, and it may not lead to near-term material revenue for them, but long-term, there's a pretty exciting story, as they have more and more of those opportunities to share, and being a part of sustainability and differentiation for consumers is going to matter in the long term. So we're starting to see that culture change happen, but I do think it's a responsibility on both sides to help get a little bit closer to meet.
We do have another question. This one is for Jody and Lee. If there was another program or connection that could help advance your business significantly, what would you want, or what would that be? So the question is another program or connection that would help you advance your business. What would you want, and what would that be? Let's start with you, Lee.
mean, at this point for us, it's really all about increasing top line sales. That's really what we're focused on as a business. So, any kind of initiative, in our case, I mean, I'm just kind of making this up here, but any kind of education that could go on with retailers around having them grab onto, like we were talking about earlier, any kind of retailer education that would help them understand how quickly consumers are becoming interested in better for you brands, or brands that are ethical. I was reading a PowerPoint deck that someone shared with me from Expo East, and in one survey, consumers said it's just as important to them how companies treat their employees as it is that they have their products readily available. Think about that. Think about that as a consumer movement, right? So any kind of education that could go on with large retailers to help them get ahead of consumers, or even just kind of match consumer trajectory, would be really helpful for us.
And Jody?
Yeah, I think one of the things that might be useful is some kind of a demonstration project where the outcomes and the information would be publicly available. One of the things that I think we see a lot is that the customers and companies that we work with, and I think agriculture in general is very private about their data. And so as we start to roll out new products and solutions that do help increase efficiencies, based on making very precise database decisions. A lot of times those outcomes are sort of held as top secret proprietary information that nobody wants to share. And so, I think a program that had some kind of a demonstration component where we could show what is possible around agricultural efficiency and make that data public, and then quantify the outcomes in terms of sustainability and things like that, and actually take the story all the way from production on a farm through what it looks like on the grocery shelf and how consumers respond to that. When you have that data available and flowing through the supply chain, I think would be really useful.
Question we talked about is how the pandemic has shifted production, venture capital dollars, brands on shelves. I guess if there's one thing that you could say definitively that, in a post-pandemic world, how food and ag has shifted, if there's one thing you could apply to the pandemic, what would that be? I know it's just a broad question I'm throwing out there, but I'm curious if any of you have a thought on that, or can weigh in on that. Anyone? Brian, okay, take it away.
Yeah, I'll briefly jump in. Just that I think even for consumers, but certainly for everyone who actively is in the value chain, I think it just reiterates the importance of partnerships, and the complexity of what we're all doing. As Jody said, ag is not a problem to be solved. It's a system that can be gradually evolved, let's say. But COVID and all the challenges it brought just reemphasized the fact that you have to be in communication with people. You just have to be working together to make it successful. And again, something to be proud of in terms of how well the value chain was able to respond.
I do have a question from the audience, unless other panelists wants to weigh in also on that post-pandemic world question. Okay. Ridley?
Yeah, I do think for brands in the CPG space, although we know that consumers are still buying 90% of their groceries in store, I do think the switch to digital is going to stick. Our web, our D2C sales have gone up. They've skyrocketed, really, and we were lucky. I know a lot of brands weren't poised to capitalize on that, and we were. But I think that is going to be a permanent shift for some consumers.
Question from the audience is, David mentioned a few reasons why our ecosystem might be lagging, like access to data, talent, amongst others. What does he think is the most actionable aspect, or one that could be solved more quickly in the short term to move the needle in Minnesota? David, that question is directly to you.
We had a great brainstorming session with a group of entrepreneurship leaders in the area. And the answer is we came up with about a dozen quick wins that we'd love, for this region to tackle. And Allison, maybe we'll put most of them back on your plate. But one of the fastest things we can do is tell the stories of the companies and the leaders that we have here and get the message out. There's no reason we should be under the radar on these amazing stories. The second, we've got really growing boot camps and coding programs that are active in the region. We can draw people into the food and ag sector with hackathons and speed dating and events to connect innovators and entrepreneurs that can start quite quickly. And then I think we can take advantage of the local and angel investors and ag leaders that are in corporates today. Maybe they're not quite ready to leave, but they can be, great mentors and supporters for early stage companies. So thinking about how do we get more, big to little mentorship and partnership programs like the Bold North story here. If we could bring 10 companies through a program like this in the next 12 months, we'd have 10 more great stories to share.
We're getting close to the finish line here. So I'd like to go around the table here and ask for some words from each of you on some of the most important things to consider in Minnesota's food and ag ecosystem moving forward. Either things that you're excited about, things your own company is doing, or just what needs to be done to move things along. I'm going to start with David, because you're on that side of my screen, and then go clockwise and finish with Rob.
We should celebrate how far we've come in the last couple of years. And again, I'll go back to Jody's flywheel point or Brian's flywheel point, like success breeds more success. So, I'd love to, where I just landed on tell stories, I'd love for us to tell our stories more and focus on attracting young, diverse talent. And, I'd love to really help the Centeras and Peace Coffees of the world become unicorns that the industry broadly is looking at and trying to replicate. I think we should all walk away from this session realizing there's no city anywhere in the world that should be better positioned to win than Minneapolis. It's just a group effort to get there.
Lee, next to you. Final words on what Peace Coffees have going on, or just more thoughts on what can be done to make the ecosystem better?
As I've been listening to everybody speak, it's been reminding me that one thing I frequently talk about is how, we were talking about the fact that coffee comes from farmers before many other brands were telling that story. And what I would always say is that if your food has a story behind it, if you're an entrepreneur who's selling food, these are some of the best people, especially if you can connect it back to a farmer. Minnesotans are some of the best people to tell that story too. As has been raised by other speakers, everybody here has a connection somewhere, right? If they grew up in Minnesota, they have a connection back to a farm. So, even though fair trade was weird and organic was weird when we got going, it's like when we could ground it in the farm, then people got what we were trying to do. So I think, this is a great place to build a food company for that reason.
Jody?
Yeah, so I think my big takeaway is I'm really optimistic about what's going on with programs like MBOLD and the resources that we have at our disposal as a startup, and support from investors like Continental Grain. I think the future looks really exciting. On the talent side, I don't think that people have historically thought of food and agriculture as the place to go work if you want to be involved in sustainability and in technology. But I think increasingly more young people are starting to understand that this is actually one of the industries or one of the sectors where you can make the biggest difference and be involved in bringing forth the biggest change. And so I'm excited that we are on the forefront of that and are going to be a part of that as it matures.
Yeah,
Brian from New York.
Jody is absolutely correct about the growing interest in food and ag, how that narrative is evolving. And yeah, I mean, again, a ton to be proud of. I think be committed and be patient in pushing forward the ecosystem. And it, you know, the change will be gradual. You won't see it, but 10 years from now, I'm really excited for where this is all going to be.
All right. Thank you all for your comments. I'm going to kick it back to Allison.
Thank you so much, Nick, and to all of our panelists for that great conversation. It's exciting to hear about the future of our entrepreneurship ecosystem and everything that's been happening with the Bold Growth program, and especially how small and large companies can continue to partner together and advance those to, as David said, get some more unicorns here in Minnesota. We will have a bit of a break until our next session kicks off at 1 p.m. with AURI's Field of Innovation session on aquaculture. However, we do have a few in-person events this afternoon if you have signed up for them, including the manufacturing tour around the metro area and the lab tour as well. Also, full track days will kick off tomorrow morning with the keynote on our food system track day. It's going to be a great conversation as we bring together two monolithic verticals we have here, the healthcare med tech sector and food and ag. Thank you so much for joining us for this hour, and we'll see you at the next session.